Hey everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right. So yeah, I don't know too much about advertising, but I'm going to talk about culture, narrative shift, media, and the ways that we can work together to shift the narrative on climate action. So, how many of you remember this film? Awesome. I'm going to age myself a little bit, but I think about this film a lot because this is the first time that I actually heard about climate change. It's really when the topic of climate change was introduced to me and my consciousness. And I think about the film often because it, to me, really represents an archetype of the way that we communicate about the climate crisis. The poster says it all, right? There's a smokestack that's putting a hurricane into the air, and it's a global warning. I think that the smaller text really speaks the most to what I'm talking about, which is it's by far, the most terrifying film you will ever see. And that's how it was advertised. And this is the way that a lot of people were introduced to climate as a topic, that it's something that we should be terrified about. This movie came out in 2006, and it made a huge cultural imprint. A lot of us saw it. A lot of us still kind of think of it as the way that the climate crisis was introduced. But it didn't really have too much of an impact on the trends of CO2 in the air, despite the fact that it tried to get everyone afraid. It came out in 2006, right around when the Kyoto Protocol entered into force. And as you can see, since then, there hasn't been too much of a shift in the trend of the amount of CO2 going into the air. So obviously we can't blame the entire climate crisis and this chart on the narrative in Inconvenient Truth, but I think we should reflect on how much that fear-based narrative really worked and how much it's working. Following Inconvenient Truth, in the next 20 years or so since that film came out, we've seen a major really upswell of the youth climate movement, people going out into the streets and protesting, and using phrases like, there is no planet B, this is a climate emergency, end fossil fuels, and, pretty much sounding the alarm, beating the drum about how we as a society have to do something different. And I've been one of these people. I've been at a lot of these climate protests. I don't know if y'all were here for New York Climate Week in 2023, but there was a big protest where about 70,000 of us shut down the streets of New York in Midtown Manhattan for a few hours, and were yelling our demands. But despite the major emotional outpouring over the course of a couple of decades from especially young people, but this isn't just a youth movement, in 2024, we saw a lot of headlines like this. It was the warmest year on record, more hurricanes, February was the warmest month, et cetera, et cetera. We seem to be breaking temperature records almost every month. And so I think there's also a reason to reflect on whether this, the narrative of, this is an emergency, we need to do something, which is still pretty much the core narrative of the climate movement, is really pulling people in. And it's starting to get, back when Inconvenient Truth was published, this was a little bit more of a conceptual problem, right? Al Gore told us that the science says that we're going to have an emergency in a few decades, but at the time, unless you were in a few countries near the equator, you didn't really feel the effects of climate change. But what's happening now is that climate change is knocking on our door wherever we live. This is a picture from my hometown of Los Angeles at the start of this year. This is from the Pacific Palisades, where it looks like a bomb went off. I mean, it looks like just pure devastation, and what this is the result of a massive wildfire ripping through the Palisades and Altadena. Truly devastating, and I was there, not in the Palisades, but I went to the Palisades about a week after the event to make some videos. I'll talk more about that in a second. But I was also part of the mutual aid effort in Altadena on the other side of town, where thousands more homes burned. And I think what's really interesting about this is that it's not conceptual anymore, right? This is a real problem that's showing up on our doorsteps. I've seen the pictures in New York City of smoke filling the air, of almost unbreathable air on the days when wildfire smoke blows into the city. And obviously here we're a little more concerned about sea level rise, which is also knocking on our door. But despite the growing presence of this problem and the inability to ignore it at this point, how much does the average American care about climate change? I think that's a question we should all be asking as media people and culture people. And we actually know the answer to this because in the 2024 election, there were a lot of polls about which of these issues are most important to you in this vote, right? This is the results of a Gallup poll that asked people to explain or answer how important is this issue to you, and it listed 22 different issues, from the economy to the state of democracy in the US, and are they extremely important, very important, somewhat important, you get it. So I was curious because I didn't see climate change near the top of the list. The reason you don't see it yet is because you have to scroll all the way to the bottom, where out of the 22 issues that were in this poll, climate change came out number 21. And this was actually kind of shocking to me because, especially in the context of hurricanes and fires and droughts, people still don't really seem to care that much. I mean, they ranked it below like relations with China and relations with Russia, which obviously all of these issues are important, right? Every single one of these issues is very important. But I think that the fact that the average American doesn't really care that much and isn't going to vote based on the climate issue, I think should be a bit of a wake-up call for people in the climate media industry. And Frank already talked about the current climate that we're working in now, the political climate. We're seeing things like this now, where the US Energy Secretary says we're going to reverse the focus on climate change. We're seeing the president himself talking about drill, baby, drill, the defense secretary saying that the Pentagon doesn't do climate change crap. And so I don't bring this all up to bum you out, but I think that this is more an invitation to think about the ways that we need to shift the narrative in order to speak to more people and meet them where they're at. Because this doomsday narrative that's really been driving the conversation for about 20 years just hasn't worked enough to pull people in. It's pulled us in, right? We're all here working in sustainability. We all care. There's millions of people who care, professionals and citizens around the world. But from a just broad cultural perspective, where we need to turn this into a mass movement, I think we need to face the truth, which is that the doomsday narrative hasn't really worked. And so what I'm here to argue today is that what would work better, I think, is to build a positive vision of the better future that we can imagine. And how do we do that? What does that look like? How do we get there? What actions can we take to make that work? Is what I want to spend the next few minutes talking about. But I do think that this is a moment when we all should be thinking a little differently about the way that we communicate. So, real quickly, who the heck am I, other than the guy who has a headshot in a tank top, which is a little unprofessional, sorry. I'm Michael Mezzatesta. I use social media to take complicated topics like climate solutions and economic policy and condense them into short-form videos that are entertaining and shareable. And I use social media to kind of just build a platform and a message around the importance of climate action, the importance of economic systems change, which is another one of my kind of core topics, and really to try and make it culturally appealing. And I'm on all the social media platforms. I also have an agency called Better Future Media where I help organizations do this, translate their message into something that's shareable and fit for social media. Here's just really quickly a few visuals of the type of videos I make. These are videos that have gotten millions of views. where I'm like trying to break down complicated ideas or unpack political kind of concepts, or in the case of the video on the right, worked with an organization called the Wellbeing Economy to take their ideas, which are really like some really great concepts around economic reform, and translate them into a shareable message. And these videos all did pretty well, so I thought they would be good examples. But the reason that I am so convinced that we need a different narrative is that I've actually been testing different narratives on social media for a couple of years and figuring out which ones really pull people in. And I've seen the results, and I'm sure that more positive messaging works better. An example of more negative messaging, because I was very upset when the LA fires happened. As you can imagine, being a climate communicator, climate activist, living through a natural disaster, or really what I think we should stop using the term natural disaster. It was really a crime if you really think about the ways that so many people are responsible for what happened. But regardless, I went to the Palisades with a few of my climate activist friends. I was really upset, and we made this video about, kind of a doom and gloom narrative. No one's gonna save us, we have to save ourselves, we have to stop using fossil fuels. And this video got lots of views. I think it got a couple million views, but almost no one followed me. And okay, social media guy complaining about not getting followers, that's not my point. What I'm trying to highlight is the fact that millions of people watched this, but no one really wanted to like join my movement, join my kind of message, because I was just, I think, making them a bit upset and scared. And a lot of people shared it with their friends because it does express an emotion that they share of frustration and anxiety about the climate crisis. But I think that these messages, like the inconvenient truth, for example, they get a lot of views. Movies like Don't Look Up are another one. They make a splash, but they don't necessarily pull people in to some sort of movement that they really want to be a part of. A counterexample is this video I made about ecological economics, which is a new way of thinking about the economy that really grounds the economy within Earth's natural systems, and kind of, instead of treating the environment as an externality, which is what we learn in economics, it treats the economy as part of the Earth. And it's a complete kind of mindset shift in the way we think about economics. It got about as many views as the video before, but more than 10,000 people followed me from this one, and it's because I was explaining something different. I was explaining something exciting, like that we could do instead, that seemed potentially better and more sustainable and more, I think, hopefully fun to be a part of. And that is really when people decide to follow, is when I'm giving them something that they can be a part of. And so what I think that we all need to think about, and as an industry, we need to do a better job of, is painting a picture of what a better future could look like and explaining how awesome it will be to live in that future. And the solar punk movement has a lot of really cool art to inspire us of what a better future could look like, but here's like a version of, this is a more European looking city, but what the future could look like. Obviously it's a little bit overdone, but I think in tangible terms, what does it mean to live in the future that we're building? It means a lot of really awesome things. It's not just that we're like avoiding a catastrophe, but all of the positive things we're building towards are cleaner air, cleaner water, more public transportation, more parks, more affordable housing, hopefully better access to nutritious food. And all of, I think the garden, which will look a lot better in a month, is a good example of that. But these things that are part of the future that we're building that we don't often talk about because we're so focused on averting a disaster, I think are actually things that we need to talk about more. And I think as an industry, it's our responsibility to ask ourselves, what would a better future look like? And not just look like, but as advertisers and people who appeal to emotion through our creative, what would it feel like? And can we pull people into that emotional experience of actually like sitting and envisioning what would it be like to live in this better world? And can we make it sexy? Like, can we make it kind of exciting and fun and almost like so cool that people would be silly not to join the movement? And I think that if we can shift our communication in that way, I'm convinced that millions more people will join and that things like that Gallup poll would have a different result, because I do think that people would be voting on this issue if they felt like it was not something they're trying to avoid, but rather something they're trying to join. So, to get us there, what do we need to do? 3 things I'm gonna just quickly run through that I think that we need more of in order to build this positive vision. Hope, new words, and obviously action. This today is all about action, right? So, how many of you all have heard of this book, Hope in the Dark? If you are struggling with the political climate right now, and as someone who deeply cares about climate, you're a little bit worried about where things are going, highly recommend checking out this book. This is a very tactical thing you can do to, I think, feel a little bit better. But what Rebecca Solnit does in this book is she's actually writing it in the context of the re-election of George W. Bush. And so she's talking about a time when she's devastated because instead of having a climate hero in the White House, we're getting an extension of the war on terror, a continuation of the Patriot Act, a rollback of civil liberties. And so she's writing for basically the movement of progressive people, of people who care about the world, and saying, okay, it's a bad moment right now. How do we get through this? And she talks a lot about hope. And something that she says about hope that really sticks out to me that I think is super important for all of us in this room is that hope is not something that you hold on to like a lottery ticket and sit on the sofa and clutch, right? I love this metaphor. Hope is an axe you break down doors with in an emergency. It's not just let's be optimistic and believe that everything's gonna work out. It's like, what can I do to make sure things work out better? And it's a belief in one's own agency. As she says here, action is impossible without hope. So I think that obviously the book is helpful, but I think just being in a room with other people who care is also helpful. So hopefully we can kind of feed off of each other's energy today and remember that, like, despite the headlines, despite the bad news, there are a ton of people who are working on this who really do care. And to the extent that we can feed off of each other's energy and optimism and hope, I think that's going to go a long way into hopefully, inspiring us to make the most out of the next few months and years. I also talked about new words. Speaking of words, does anyone recognize this list? This is from the New York Times a few weeks ago. Yeah, so this is a list of basically words that have been flagged by the current administration. It's way too long for me to put on one page. I just took a screenshot of the top of the list. But these are basically bad words, according to the new administration, that government agencies have been asked to flag. Scary times. But there are a few of the words that jumped out to me as someone working in this space. These words are on the list. Clean energy, climate crisis, and climate science are basically being flagged by the government right now as words that are kind of not really good and probably should be flagged. Grant funding should be pulled back for these types of projects, and these words have largely been scrubbed from U.S. government websites. So I think very tactically, we need to use different words just because of the political climate, but it's not just about the Trump administration, right? I think this poll is one that I cite a lot because it's so interesting to me. In 1989, 76% of Americans said that they were environmentalists. And by 2021, that number had declined to 41%, despite the climate crisis getting so much worse. About half as many people consider themselves environmentalists. And I think that's largely because the word environmentalist and the concept of climate has been so politicized. But despite that, 70% of these people still said that they favor public policies around air, water, and toxic waste pollution. So I think this is a little bit of a map to get to a new set of words that we can use to talk about climate and to kind of reframe the green movement. So The traditional framing, obviously climate, sustainability, environment, decarbonization, words that we're all gonna use a lot today. I'm not saying that these words are bad, I like these words, but I think what I'm talking about is when we go out into the world and speak to a wider audience, I don't think these are the words to use because they don't really resonate with so many people, and the number of people who care about these is steadily dropping. So, what are other words we can use? Clean air, clean water, more animals. Biodiversity is another way to say that, but it's, you know, it's kind of big. Less pollution. Other ideas. Clean energy, more energy, because if we have solar and we really build it out, we're gonna have a lot more energy than we did before. So it's this idea of abundant energy, better public transportation, better health, more green spaces, more walkable cities, better access to food, fewer microplastics in our bodies. That sounds nice too. I think that in a lot of ways, if we kind of shift the words we're using and talk a little bit more about how it relates to people in these ways that are a little bit more related to health and lifestyle, I think that will go a long way. So just a few ideas. This is kind of like the inception phase of the presentation, where I'm just gonna throw a few ideas at you at the end here, because these are all things that are working for me and hopefully can work for you too. But the last bit here is more around the action, right? What can we do? It's obviously we need hope, we need this positive vision, we need to probably use different words at least for the next few years. But what can we do? And this is hard, right? Especially for industry, because we're all working within an industry that is trying to, you know, improve the bottom line, increase revenue, and at the same time decarbonize and reduce environmental impact. And for a digital industry, thankfully, it's a little bit easier, but for many industries that we're all working with, it can be really hard within the context of a growth-based capitalist economy, right? So it's not simple, but what I would invite us to think about today is what can we accomplish together that we cannot do ourselves? Because ultimately, I think that something that in industry we often forget is that when we come together, we actually have a ton of political power, and the amount of money that is moving through these platforms, these advertising platforms, and the amount of spend that these brands have on advertising is actually like very significant, and it would make politicians raise their eyebrows, especially if we kind of threw our weight around a little bit. So I think I would invite you all to think about what alliances can we form in the room today while we're all together, and how could today hopefully kick off some sort of broader project at an industry level. But very tactically, here are some quick more moments of inception in terms of what we can do. Obviously, investing in renewable energy is super helpful. Decarbonizing supply chains, super helpful. The next panel is about decarbonization. I will let the experts speak about that. Diverting revenue to climate and climate justice projects is super important. I think that when we conceive of all of these different ways that we can help people enter into climate, whether that's more nutritious food or, you know, more affordable housing, any way that your company can invest in your community and kind of shift your mindset into thinking about the ways that your company's success is actually your community's success is super powerful. And if there's local nonprofit chapters or you know, climate initiatives that are happening locally, I encourage you to, you know, think about creative ways that you can help fund them. But I think from an advertising perspective, this idea of redirecting consumption patterns is probably the most powerful one. And Frank talked about that in his last speech around this like kind of climate easy button. That type of thing is so powerful, and I wonder what it would look like for many companies in this room to do something like that. Last bit is around cultural norms. Advertising, it really, when I say, you know, make the movement more sexy, I actually think advertisers are the perfect audience for that, because advertising, in many ways, it does make, you can make things sexy. You can almost steer culture, and I think that to the extent that we can think of ways to talk about climate that are not, hey, look how much we're removing emissions from our you know, our products, but more around like, hey, how hot is this person or this project that is making some sort of climate impact, and like, isn't this cool? I think is a mindset shift that we can all make together. And obviously, like I mentioned, recognizing and wielding our political power, especially in the local area and in the ways that we can do that in New York State is super, super important. So overall, I think that if we use some of these ideas, and maybe one or two of them are applicable to your situation, if we use different words, if we stay hopeful and work together, if we can build a positive vision of the future we're building and pull people into it, I think that means that the sustainability movement will grow, and hopefully the next time we gather together in this room next year, we feel like the winds are in our sails, as opposed to really kind of fighting to hold on to something that we're trying not to lose. So thanks for your time. Really appreciate it, and let me know if you want to talk more about this stuff. I'll be around, but I'm excited for today, and I think that the focus on action is a really important one. And hopefully, if we frame it in terms of a positive vision, that'll allow us to find ways to work together. Thanks, y'all.